They say betrayal cuts deeper than a knife, but what if the ones holding the blade were your best friends? Michael was a loyal, kind man, but jealousy turned his closest friends, James and David, into traitors. They spread lies, destroyed his reputation, and left him with nothing. Even Sarah, the woman he loved, walked away. Everyone thought Michael's story was over, but his silence wasn't weakness, it was preparation. What no one knew was that Michael had already sensed betrayal long before it struck. Quietly, he had begun collecting proof documents recording secrets that James and David thought were buried forever. The men who believed they had crushed him had unknowingly walked straight into his trap, and soon that silence would explode into a storm. Don't miss part 2, subscribe, and like for the next chapter. The most dangerous enemy is the one who smiles in your face and waits in the dark. James and David thought Michael was finished. They drank, laughed, and celebrated his downfall. But in that silence, Michael was moving like a shadow. He tracked their every step, who they met, where they went, what they were hiding. One night, he uncovered something chilling. James and David hadn't just destroyed his reputation, they had set a trap that could ruin many more lives. And buried inside that trap was a secret that could burn everything they had built. For the first time, fear shifted side. James and David didn't know it yet, but Michael was no longer the hunted, he was the hunter. And when the hunter strikes, betrayal will taste like blood. Don't miss part 3, subscribe, and like for the next chapter. When a man loses everything, he becomes dangerous, but when he has nothing left to fear, he becomes unstoppable. Michael's silence was no longer just patience, it was strategy. He began striking in ways James and David couldn't see. Bank accounts they thought were hidden, suddenly frozen. Deals they planned mysteriously collapsed. Friends who once trusted them started to question every word, and yet Michael never showed his hand. To the world, he was still broken, defeated, forgotten. But in the shadows, he was tightening the noose. Late one night, David felt at first strange calls with no voice. On the other end, files missing from his office, and a letter left on his desk with just 2 words, I know. Fear crept in. The hunters were beginning to realize they were now the prey, and the deeper the fear, the closer the revenge. Don't miss part 4, subscribe, and like for the next chapter. Betrayal creates silence, but revenge speaks louder than thunder. James and David thought fear was just paranoia, but then Michael made his move. It began with James. His biggest deal of the year collapsed overnight when investors received leaked recordings of his lies. In a single day, his empire cracked. David wasn't spared either. At a crowded gathering, confidential documents appeared, proving he had framed Michael and stolen money under his name. Gasps filled the room, and the same crowd that once mocked Michael now turned on David like wolves. Neither friend had proof that Michael was behind it, but deep inside they knew. And that knowledge alone was enough to break them. For the first time since his downfall, Michael stood in the same room as his enemies. He didn't shout, he didn't fight, he just looked at them with a quiet smile. A smile that promised the storm had only begun, and when the final storm hits, only one man will be left standing. Don't miss part 5, subscribe, and like for the grand finale. They thought they had buried him, but Michael was the fire rising from the ashes. The world that once mocked him now watched James and David crumble. Their lies exposed their power, slipping their names, drowning in shame. But Michael wasn't done, not yet. Revenge wasn't about destroying their wealth, it was about breaking their pride. At a grand business gala where the city's most powerful gathered, Michael made his final move. On the giant screen behind the stage, hidden files lit up, proof of every betrayal, every theft, every cruel trick James and David had played. Gasps echoed, cameras flashed, and the 2 men stood frozen as their empire turned to dust before everyone's eyes. Sarah was there too. For the first time, she saw the truth, that the man she left was never the villain. Tears filled her eyes as Michael walked past her, but he didn't stop. He had no reason to look back, and as James and David were dragged away in disgrace, Michael stepped out into the night, not as the broken man they betrayed, but as the storm they never saw coming. This was Michael's revenge. But remember, every end is also a beginning. Should we continue with a new chapter? Like and subscribe if you want more stories like this. As Sarah stood there, she felt a spark igniting within her, a desire to redefine her own path. In that moment, she understood that true strength comes from embracing the past rather than running from it. While Michael moved forward, leaving behind the shadows of betrayal, Sarah took a deep breath, ready to face the consequences of her choices. The night air was electric with possibilities, and she whispered to herself, "This is just the beginning." Sarah was there too. For the first time, she saw the truth, that the man she left was never the villain. Tears filled her eyes as Michael walked past her, but he didn't stop. He had no reason to look back. And as James and David were dragged away in disgrace, Michael stepped out into the night. Not as the broken man they betrayed, but as the storm they never saw coming. This was Michael's revenge. But remember, every end is also a beginning. Should we continue with a new chapter? Like and subscribe if you want more stories.